In a small, quiet town nestled in the heart of the Wild West, Sarah Weston lived alone on her ranch. The town was dusty, the air hot and dry, and the land stretched out for miles in all directions. It was a place where people rarely came, and those who did often left quickly. For Sarah, the town felt like a cage. She had once had a life full of love and joy, but all that changed when her husband, William, was killed in a gunfight with a band of outlaws 3 years ago. Since that tragic day, Sarah had been living a life of loneliness. Her husband had been the sheriff of the town, a man of honor and courage. His death had shaken the entire community, and Sarah had struggled to find her place without him. She worked hard on the ranch, doing everything she could to keep the farm running, but no matter how much work she did, the pain of losing him never fully left. Every evening, after finishing her chores, Sarah would sit by the window of the old wooden house, looking out at the land she had once shared with her husband. The wind would rustle the trees and she would close her eyes, imagining that William was still there beside her. But as the years passed, she came to accept that he was gone and that she would have to carry on alone. Then one evening, everything changed. The sound of hooves pounding against the ground interrupted Sarah's quiet thoughts. She looked out the window and saw a lone rider coming toward the ranch. It wasn't unusual for people to pass by the area, but there was something about this rider that caught her attention. His posture was straight, his dark hat pulled low over his eyes. As he drew closer, Sarah's heart began to race. The man dismounted and tied his horse to a post near the fence. His face was rough, weathered by the sun and the harsh winds of the west. His clothes were faded, his boots worn from years of use. He looked like the kind of man who had seen more than his fair share of violence and trouble. But there was something about him that made Sarah's pulse quicken. A danger, a presence that was hard to ignore. Before she could stop herself, she found her feet moving toward the door. The man had already knocked, his fist pounding against the wood. With a sigh, Sarah opened the door and stepped outside. The man's eyes met hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the unease she felt. The man took off his hat, revealing dark, shaggy hair and a strong jawline. His eyes were a deep, cold blue like the sky before a storm. "I'm looking for work," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I heard there's a widow here who might need some help around the ranch." Sarah took a step back, instinctively pulling the door slightly closer to her. The idea of letting a stranger into her home, especially a man like this one, didn't sit well with her. She had heard of men like him before, dangerous men who had no respect for the law or for women like her. "I don't need any help," Sarah replied quickly, trying to keep her voice calm. "I can manage on my own." The man didn't move, his eyes scanning the land behind her. "It's a lot of work for one person," he said, his gaze flicking back to her. "A man like me could make it easier." Sarah frowned. "I don't need help from someone like you." She hesitated, her mind racing. "I'm fine." The man's lips curled into a slight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not here to cause trouble, ma'am. Just here to work." Sarah was about to close the door, but something made her hesitate. Perhaps it was the quiet desperation in his voice or the strange feeling that lingered in the air between them. She glanced at his horse, then back at the man. "What's your name?" she asked despite herself. "Call me Cole," he replied, the name rolling off his tongue effortlessly. He took a small step forward as if testing her reaction. Sarah's grip tightened on the door handle. "Cole," she repeated, "I don't need any help, and I don't want any trouble." She stood firm, not allowing herself to be swayed by his calm demeanor. Cole studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I can see you're a strong woman," he said, his voice softening slightly. "But no one should have to do all of this alone." Sarah shook her head. "I'm fine on my own." She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, as if the man could sense her fear and hesitation. But despite everything, there was a part of her that wasn't so sure. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her want to trust him even though every instinct screamed at her not to. "All right," Cole said, stepping back. "I won't force myself on you. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." With that, he turned and walked back to his horse, mounting it with ease. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, watching him ride away. For a moment, she wondered if he would return. But then she pushed the thought from her mind. Closing the door behind her, Sarah leaned against it, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea who that man was, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was someone she didn't want to mess with. And yet she couldn't help but wonder, why had he come here? Why had he seemed so intent on offering help, even when she had clearly refused it? As the night settled in, Sarah tried to shake off the unsettling feeling that had settled over her. She would go on as she always had. She would keep the ranch running as her husband would have wanted. There was no room for men like Cole Donovan in her life, no room for anyone at all, really. She had her own battles to fight, and she didn't need anyone to complicate things further. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't help but think about Cole Donovan. What did he want? And would he come back? Deep down, she knew that the dangerous cowboy had already left his mark on her heart. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Cole Donovan. Even as the days passed, his presence lingered in her mind, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. She had tried to convince herself that he was nothing more than a passing stranger, someone who would fade from her life as quickly as he had entered. But every time she walked past the window, she found herself looking toward the horizon, hoping, no, dreading that she would see him again. The days were long on the ranch, with the same repetitive tasks, feeding the animals, mending fences, and maintaining the crops. But somehow the work seemed heavier, more burdensome now that she couldn't stop thinking about him. It wasn't just that he was a stranger. It was the way he had looked at her. That strange mix of determination and understanding in his eyes left Sarah with an uneasy feeling she couldn't shake. She had made it clear when they first met that she didn't need his help. But there was something about the way he had spoken to her that made her doubt her own decision. It was as if he had seen something in her, something she hadn't wanted anyone to notice. And it frightened her. One afternoon, as Sarah was walking back from the barn, she saw a familiar figure riding towards the ranch. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to admit it, but she had been expecting him. Cole Donovan, riding toward her like some kind of ghost from the past. She paused for a moment, standing still as he approached, his horse's hooves thudding softly against the dirt road. The air was hot and dry, and the land stretched endlessly around her. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "Ma'am," Cole called out, his voice calm but still carrying that underlying edge of authority that made Sarah's pulse quicken. "You're looking like you could use some help." She bit her lip, fighting the urge to snap at him again. He was persistent, there was no denying that. And his calm demeanor made it even harder to ignore him. What did he want from her? What was his game? "I told you before I don't need your help," Sarah replied, her voice firmer than she felt. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to appear as strong as she could. "I can take care of myself." Cole didn't seem bothered by her response. He merely slowed his horse down and looked at her with a steady gaze, his face unreadable. "I don't doubt that," he said softly. "But even the strongest people need help sometimes." Sarah's heart beat a little faster, but she refused to show it. "I'm fine, Mr. Donovan, I told you that before." For a long moment they just stood there locked in silence. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah felt the weight of his gaze, even though he hadn't said another word. She hated how much it unsettled her. But before she could turn away, Cole spoke again, his voice a little softer this time. "I know you've lost someone, ma'am," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "I know what it's like to lose someone important." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She had never spoken to anyone about her husband's death, not since the funeral. She had buried her grief deep inside, never allowing herself to fully grieve. It was too painful, and now standing in front of this man who seemed to know something about loss, she felt like the dam holding back her emotions was starting to crack. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. She could feel the tears threatening to spill, but she fought them back. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice wavering despite her best efforts. "You don't know what I've been through." Cole's expression softened just for a moment, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of something other than cold detachment in his eyes. Maybe it was empathy. Maybe it was something else. But whatever it was, it made Sarah's heart beat a little faster despite herself. "I'm not here to judge you," he said quietly. "I just thought maybe you could use some help around here. It's a lot of work for one person." Sarah shook her head, wiping away the stray tear that had escaped down her cheek. She didn't want his pity, and she certainly didn't want to let him get close. "I don't need anything from you," but Cole wasn't done. "All right," he said, nodding. "I won't push you anymore. But if you change your mind, I'm not far." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "I don't want to see you struggle when you don't have to." With that, he turned his horse around and began to ride back toward town, his figure growing smaller in the distance. Sarah stood frozen in the same spot, watching him go. Her mind raced, torn between the need to push him away and the strange pull she felt toward him. For the rest of the day, Sarah couldn't shake the thoughts that had started to swirl in her mind. There was no reason for her to keep thinking about him. She didn't need his help. She didn't need anyone. But for the first time in years, she found herself wondering if she really could keep doing this alone. That evening, Sarah found herself walking through the same old routine. She fed the animals, checked the fences, and worked on the fields. But even as she moved through the tasks she had done countless times before, her thoughts kept returning to Cole. Why had he come back? Why had he been so insistent? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Sarah finally allowed herself a moment to pause. She looked out over the open fields, the quietness of the land settling over her like a blanket. The wind was gentle tonight, and it felt almost comforting, as though the world itself was trying to tell her something. Just then, she heard the sound of hooves again. A familiar figure appeared on the horizon, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was him, Cole Donovan, but this time he didn't stop at the fence. Instead, he rode right up to her porch, dismounted, and walked toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something different in his posture, a sense of determination in the way he moved. "I couldn't stay away," he said simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Sarah swallowed hard, her breath catching in her throat. She had told herself she wouldn't let him in. But now, standing in front of her, she wasn't so sure, and deep down, she knew that he had already begun to break down the wall she had so carefully built around her heart. The days grew longer as Sarah continued to live her life, trying her best to keep everything under control. But there was something different now. No matter how hard she tried, her thoughts often drifted back to Cole Donovan. She didn't want to think about him, but it seemed impossible to stop. She had spent so long convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that she didn't want anyone. But each time Cole showed up, even just to check on her, those thoughts began to unravel. His quiet determination, the way he always seemed to understand her without saying much. He was like a shadow that followed her everywhere. It had been a week since he'd last come by, but she knew he wouldn't be gone for long. There was something about him that kept pulling her back in, despite her best efforts to stay distant. She had pushed him away more than once, but each time he had come back, as if he wasn't going to let her be alone, whether she liked it or not. It was a hot afternoon when Sarah found herself standing in the barn, trying to mend a fence that had been damaged during a recent storm. The work was hard, the sun beating down on her with relentless heat, but she was used to it. As she bent down to secure a post, she heard the sound of hooves approaching. Her heart gave a small jump in her chest. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Cole had returned. He appeared in the doorway of the barn, silhouetted against the bright light. His horse stood outside, grazing peacefully. Cole was dressed in his usual faded clothes, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. But it was his presence that always took Sarah by surprise. He seemed to fill every space around him, making everything else seem smaller. "I thought you might need a hand," Cole said, his voice steady. But there was a softness in his tone that Sarah hadn't noticed before. Sarah straightened, wiping sweat from her brow. She didn't want to admit it, but his offer was hard to refuse. "I told you already, I'm fine," she replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "I can do this on my own." Cole's eyes softened, but he didn't push her. Instead, he stepped closer and began examining the fence with a quiet efficiency. "I'm sure you can," he said simply, "but this is a lot of work for one person. Maybe we could get it done faster together." Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to be weak. She didn't want to rely on anyone, especially not him. But as she watched Cole work, his movements practiced and calm, something in her softened. She couldn't deny that his help would make the work easier. And deep down she knew there was more to his presence than just a desire to help with chores. "All right," she said at last, stepping aside. "You can help. But only for today." Cole gave her a small, quiet smile, and together they worked in silence. There was something peaceful about it, about the rhythm of their movements, the steady work of fixing the fence. It was almost as if they had been doing this together for years, as if they were a team. As the hours passed, Sarah found herself talking less and less. It wasn't that she didn't want to speak, But with Cole nearby, everything felt different. It felt like the world had quieted down, leaving only the sounds of their work and the distant calls of birds. In those moments, she forgot about the pain in her heart, the loneliness that had followed her since her husband's death. She focused on the task in front of her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly living again. But as much as she enjoyed the peace, Sarah couldn't ignore the growing tension inside her. She had always been in control of her life, always been able to handle whatever came her way. She had built walls around her heart, and they had protected her from the hurt that came with losing William. But now, standing next to Cole, she felt the walls start to crumble. His quiet presence made her question everything she had thought she knew about herself. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked, her voice soft but full of curiosity. The question had been on her mind for days, and now it slipped out before she could stop herself. Cole paused for a moment, his hand resting on the fence post as he considered her question. Then with a shrug he answered, "I guess I see something in you that I can't ignore." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear more, but she found herself waiting for him to continue. "You've been through a lot," Cole said quietly, his eyes not meeting hers. "I can tell. I've been through my own struggles, and sometimes it helps to have someone around who understands." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't used to people talking to her like this, so openly, so honestly. It made her feel vulnerable in a way she wasn't ready for. "I don't need anyone," Sarah replied quickly, perhaps a little too quickly. She felt the words leave her mouth before she could stop them, but she couldn't take them back now. "I know," Cole said, his voice gentle, "but sometimes we need people even when we don't want to admit it." He looked at her then, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made Sarah's heart race. "I'm not asking for anything, Sarah. I just want to be here. To help if you'll let me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and full of meaning. Sarah opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. She couldn't explain what she was feeling, couldn't put into words the confusion that swirled inside her. "I don't know if I can do this," Sarah finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been alone for so long. I don't know how to let anyone in again." Cole took a step closer, his voice soft but firm. "I'm not asking you to forget about your past, Sarah. I'm just asking you to give me a chance to be a part of your future." Sarah looked at him, her breath catching in her chest. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still, the distance between them growing smaller with each passing second. It was as if everything had led to this moment. The quiet years she had spent alone, the loss of her husband, and now, the possibility of something new. "I don't know what I'm doing," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't have to know," Cole said, reaching out and gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Just take it one step at a time." For the first time in years, Sarah didn't pull away. She let his touch linger, and in that moment she realized that perhaps she didn't have to carry all the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. Maybe, just maybe, she could let someone in, but it wasn't easy. The walls around her heart were still there, strong and high, and it would take time to break them down. But for the first time, she was willing to try. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt hope. The days had been calm since Sarah had let Cole back into her life, and the ranch was slowly beginning to feel more like home again. Her heart, though still guarded, was opening in ways she hadn't expected. She found herself looking forward to his visits, even though she refused to admit it. With each passing day, Cole became more of a fixture in her life, helping with the chores, offering small words of encouragement, and quietly earning her trust. Yet despite the comfort of his presence, Sarah knew things couldn't stay this peaceful forever. The world outside her little ranch was still as dangerous as ever, and trouble had a way of finding people even when they least expected it. The West was a place where the law was weak, and those who took matters into their own hands ruled with force and fear. It was one late afternoon when the storm arrived. The sky darkened with the weight of an approaching storm, but it wasn't the weather that caused Sarah's heart to race. It was the news that came with it. She was in the barn, tending to the horses, when Cole came running toward her, his face grim. Sarah looked up from the stall, her hand still resting on the reins of one of the horses. "There's trouble coming," Cole said, his voice low but urgent. Sarah froze. "What kind of trouble?" Cole didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around as if ensuring they were alone. His eyes were sharp, scanning the horizon even though the wind had started to pick up, and dark clouds were gathering overhead. A gang, he finally said. A group of outlaws that have been causing trouble in the nearby towns. They're heading this way. I don't know when they'll arrive, but they're coming. The words hit Sarah like a heavy blow. She had heard of such groups before. Men who terrorized towns and robbed, burned, and killed without hesitation. She could feel the blood drain from her face as the reality of the situation sank in. What do we do? She asked, her voice a whisper. She had never been good at handling situations like this. Her husband had been the law in these parts, the man who kept the peace, but he was gone. She was alone now, and the thought of facing a gang of outlaws made her stomach turn. Cole moved closer to her, his expression hardening. I'll take care of it. But you need to stay here. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone unless it's me or someone you trust. Sarah shook her head, a mixture of fear and defiance rising inside her. I won't hide like a coward, she said, her voice more forceful than she felt. I'll stand my ground. Cole looked at her, a brief flash of frustration crossing his face. You don't have to do this, Sarah. Stay out of it. You've already lost enough. She didn't respond right away, but the words stung. Her heart was heavy with the memory of William's death, and the thought of losing anyone else sent a chill through her. But she was no coward. She had spent too long trying to live with the fear, and now, when faced with real danger, she wasn't about to let it rule her life. I won't run, she said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. I'll help however I can. Cole didn't argue. He knew she was determined, and he had learned by now that Sarah wasn't someone to be easily pushed aside. But he didn't want her in harm's way. All right, he said after a moment, his voice softer now. But if things get too dangerous, you need to promise me you'll leave. She nodded, though she didn't make any promises. Just be careful, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole gave her a tight nod before turning and walking toward his horse, already preparing for whatever was coming. Sarah watched him leave, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a mixture of fear and something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't sure if it was hope or love, but the feeling was real, and it tied her to him in a way she couldn't explain. She didn't want to stay inside, hiding while Cole went out to face the danger. But deep down she knew it was the right thing to do. She had to trust him, just as he trusted her to stay safe. The wind picked up as the sky darkened, the first signs of the storm's arrival making the air heavy with tension. Sarah locked the door behind her, the sound of the key turning in the lock louder than it should have been. Her heart was racing and she tried to steady her breath. She couldn't just sit there waiting. She had to do something. She went to the window and peered out, hoping to catch a glimpse of Cole as he prepared for the fight. The storm raged outside, and the shadows of the approaching night made it hard to see. But she could hear the sounds of horses galloping in the distance, growing louder by the second. The outlaws were getting closer. Minutes passed like hours, the tension in the air growing thicker. Sarah moved through the house, checking the locks on the doors and windows, preparing herself for whatever might come. She was trying to stay calm, trying to focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept drifting back to Cole. She couldn't help but worry. He was brave, but he was also a man with a dangerous past. Finally, she heard the distant sound of gunfire. Her heart leapt in her chest and she rushed to the window once more. Through the heavy rain, she could make out the shapes of men on horseback, their figures silhouetted against the stormy sky. She could hear shouting, the clash of metal and the pounding of hooves. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew that Cole was out there, facing the men who had come to take whatever they wanted. She couldn't stay inside anymore. She had to do something. Without thinking, she grabbed her rifle from the corner where it had been left for years. Her hand shook as she checked it, the familiar weight comforting her in the chaos of the moment. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a surge of purpose. Cole had gone out there to protect her, to protect everything she had worked for. She couldn't just sit back and wait for him to return. Sarah stepped out into the storm, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what would happen, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let anyone destroy her life without a fight. She would stand by Cole, whatever the cost. The storm had come in full force. The winds howled and the rain lashed against the windows of Sarah's house, blurring the world outside. But inside, her heart was clear. She had made her choice. She wasn't going to hide away any longer. Sarah stood by the door, rifle in hand, her breath steadying as she prepared herself for whatever came next. Cole had gone out to face the danger, but Sarah knew she couldn't just wait for him to return. He had promised her he'd protect her, but deep down she understood that protection was something they both needed. This wasn't just his fight. It was hers too. The people who threatened the town, who threatened her, were not just Cole's enemies. They were hers as well. With determination in her step, Sarah pushed open the door, her heart racing as she stepped out into the rain. She could barely see through the downpour, but she knew the way to the barn and she knew the landscape around her well enough to trust her instincts. Every step felt like a decision, a turning point, where she moved from fear to action, from loneliness to hope. As Sarah made her way toward the edge of the ranch, she saw the faint glow of lanterns in the distance. The sounds of horses and shouting were louder now, and she could sense that the battle had already begun. She moved quickly but quietly, trying to stay out of sight as she approached. She had to find Cole to see if he was still fighting and if he was okay. It wasn't long before she saw him, Cole, riding his horse toward the barn, his face set in a grim expression, covered with rain but determined. Behind him the sounds of the gang echoed. Sarah's heart tightened, but she didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle, prepared to help, prepared to do whatever she could. "Cole," she called out, her voice cutting through the storm. He turned sharply at the sound of her voice, his eyes wide with shock, but there was no time for words. He knew she wasn't going to listen to him. "Get back inside," he shouted, urging her away. But Sarah wasn't going anywhere. "No, I'm staying right here," she called back, stepping forward, the rifle steady in her hands. "I'm not going to run." For a moment there was silence between them, just the sound of rain beating down. Cole looked at her, his brow furrowed as if trying to decide what to do next. But in that moment he understood. Sarah wasn't just some woman he was protecting. She was strong, she was brave, and she wanted to stand with him, not behind him. "I can't let you stay out here," he said, his voice strained. "And I can't let you face this alone," Sarah replied, her voice unwavering. Cole looked into her eyes, seeing the fire there. He nodded, knowing she wouldn't back down. "All right then. Stay close," he said, his voice softer now. "We fight together." With that, they turned toward the barn where the gang had gathered. The fight had already started, but there were still some men nearby shouting orders. The storm made everything harder to see, but it also hid their movements, giving them a slight advantage. Sarah and Cole crept closer, moving from cover to cover. Sarah kept her rifle trained ahead, her body tense with every sound. She had never been part of a fight like this, but she had learned to be strong. She had learned to survive. And in this moment she was fighting for her future, for the future she could have with Cole, and for the life she refused to lose. They reached the edge of the barn, and Cole motioned for her to stay low. The gang members were too busy with the chaos of the battle to notice them for a moment. It was a small advantage, but it was enough. Cole gave a quick nod, signaling to Sarah to move in. They stepped into the open, their steps quick but silent. The rain and wind drowned out most of the noise, but Sarah's heart was still pounding in her chest. She could feel Cole's presence beside her, and despite the danger, she knew they were in this together. There was no going back. Just as they reached the corner of the barn, one of the outlaws turned and spotted them. "There!" he yelled, and everything erupted into chaos. Cole was already moving, drawing his gun and taking down the nearest threat. Sarah's hand shook slightly as she aimed her rifle, but she focused and fired. The shot was true, and the outlaw she aimed at stumbled back. The fight was on. For what felt like hours, Sarah and Cole moved through the storm, fighting side by side. The outlaws were tough, but Sarah's determination and Cole's skill made them a force to be reckoned with. When one of the gang members tried to come at Sarah, Cole was there to pull him off, keeping her safe. The battle was exhausting, but Sarah didn't stop. Her body ached, and her mind raced with fear. But she had made the choice to stand her ground, and she wasn't going to let fear take that away. With each passing moment, she felt a sense of strength building inside her. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She wasn't just a woman hiding from the world. She was someone who fought for what mattered. Someone who had found a reason to hope again. As the last of the gang members fled, Sarah and Cole stood in the midst of the rain-soaked battlefield, breathless and battered. The barn was damaged, but the ranch was safe for now. Sarah wiped the rain from her face, her hands trembling. She looked at Cole, his face streaked with water and dirt, but his eyes still held that fire she had seen when they first met. He wasn't a man to give up. And now neither was she. I told you not to come out here, Cole said, his voice hoarse but with a faint smile. You didn't think I'd let you face this alone, did you? Sarah replied, her heart racing in the aftermath of the fight. Cole stepped closer, his expression softening. You're braver than you think, he said quietly. Sarah shook her head, her eyes meeting his. I'm just tired of being afraid. I'm tired of pretending I don't need anyone. Cole's hand reached for hers, and for the first time, Sarah didn't pull away. She let him hold her hand, the warmth of his touch grounding her in a way nothing else could. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Cole whispered, his voice low but full of certainty. You don't have to face this alone. Sarah, you never have to be alone again. In that moment, as the storm finally began to let up, Sarah realized that she had found what she had been searching for all along. She had found someone who would stand beside her, someone who wouldn't leave her to fight her battles by herself. She had found a chance at love, at redemption, and it was more than she could have ever hoped for. Together, they stood in the quiet aftermath of the storm, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. The past was behind them, and the future, with all its uncertainty, was waiting. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt ready to face it, and this time she wouldn't be afraid.